So good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you live. So I put this presentation together in hopes that it will help folks better understand the big why. Hopefully, all of you have taken the big why. If you haven't taken the big why, this will give you an idea of what to expect if you do upgrade to the big Y 700. But when I first did the big Y, throughout the last couple of years, every time there was a change, I had taken screenshots of my page, of my my block tree in different sections, and thought that, hey, now that I've actually identified an individual that's tied to a SNP, I said, hey, let me put all the pieces together with all the different screenshots and kind of walk through what it looks like when you do the whole step-by-step, get to a point where you can identify an ancestor. Does anybody have any questions before I jump in? Perfect. So haplogroup branches, why are they important? Each branch is an actual intersection of, it's an actual common ancestor at that intersection. And when we have branches, it actually enables us to better give a date to the time to the most recent common ancestor. And that's done through family tree DNA. They've got some very smart individuals there that have put in some algorithms that they're able to date branches. The other big thing is if we just used STRs, STRs are really good for knowing people are related, but it doesn't really show how they're related. So the branches actually show how people are more closely related to each other than just STRs. And a good example is Steve and I are actually cousins. He and I have a close match on our Y111, more so than my third cousin. So my third cousin and I share a common ancestor in the early 1800s, but Steve and I don't share a common ancestor until the 1600s. But the block tree in the big Y shows that, where STRs doesn't. Another big thing regarding the branches is it provides additional evidence of relationships. So we use a lot of genealogical records like deeds, birth records, marriage date, land deeds, but also having DNA is nice to document everything. And then to me, the ultimate goal is actually if we're able to determine an actual SNP to an ancestor. Why that's important is because anybody that has that SNP, we know descends from that one individual. So this is, again, my personal journey. So back in March 2016, Ancestry, I don't know, a lot of folks know this, but Ancestry used to do Y-DNA testing. And so I had taken the Y46 test, and then I uploaded it into a family tree DNA, and I joined the Redmond surname project. When you do a transfer, it doesn't show your matches. So I didn't have any matches at that point. So eventually I took the Y111 in December of 2018, and lo and behold, I had something like 30 plus Sinclair matches, Sinclair matches. So that little light bulb went off, said, I wonder if I had a name change. And maybe that's why I'm having a struggle trying to get over my Joseph Redmond brick wall. So after I got that result, talked with Steve, realized he and I were cousins, and didn't take much convincing, but I went ahead and took the big Y 700, and it was completed in March of 2019. So this is what my initial block tree looked like in March of 2019. You can see I had 4 matches, one match under the BY11212, and then 3 matches under the ZS4578. And then I was sitting alone in the branch ZS4576. what you'll notice, and this is kind of interesting. So if you have a block tree, you may have noticed the flags and the numbers here. Well, you can see it shows I have 0 matches, but yet there's 3 people listed here. So I'm this one with the American flag, and then there's one individual with the Scotland flag and one with the England flag. That is, those are 2 individuals that only took the SNP test, meaning they only tested for RZS 4576, and they were positive for it. So if you ever see that, just understand that, hey, probably they took a SNP test and not an actual big Y. What my results showed was I had 6 private variances. And so that means that from the common ancestor of Steve, because Steve was down here in one of these 3 individuals, and the other 3 Sinclair matches, I had 6 private variances that broke off from that common ancestor, meaning I had 6 different mutations that happened after leaving that common ancestor. So let's take a look at it. Here are my 6 private variances, and they're considered not named, so they're just the number. And hopefully, I think I've mentioned this on previous Zoom calls. These numbers are just the actual position on the Y chromosome. So there is a genome reference Castorium human build 38. It's an actual reference that most companies are using that actually gives a position from 0 up to over 57 million base pairs. So there's numbers from 0 all the way up to 57 million. And this is one position on that Y chromosome. And in that way, if Family Tree DNA has this number and you're on some other company that uses Y-DNA testing, if they're on that same reference model, then they know exactly where that point is, because we're talking the same. And again, it occurred after the branching. So we had a common ancestor. When I broke away, I had 6 mutations from that point. Any questions on this? So what I needed to do in order to actually name them, to actually get them onto the haplo tree, is to find a second tester. And that could be anybody. It could be your father, your brother, cousin, uncle, son. And there's 2 goals. One is naming the private variances, actually giving it an actual name. And then for me, it's determining who the progenitor is, or who the person that first created that SNP. Luckily for me, I actually found a 3rd cousin twice removed. And that individual is 3rd cousins with my grandfather. So he's actually 2 generations older than me. He's in his 80s. He may have passed away. I'm not sure. I got to reach out to him. But I knew he was going to be a great match, because not only did I have a paper trail showing our connection, but we were also a match, autosomal match on Ancestry. So I reached out to him, say, hey, would you be willing to take a big Y? And he said yes. And so we scheduled it. He took it in August of 2020, and in October of 2020, the results came in. So what did it show? It showed that he had 2 private variances. So let's compare the 2. So mine are on the left and his is on the right. I had 6, he had 2, but really what's important is he shared 2 mutations that I shared. So his only 2 mutations are the same mutations that I had, which means both those 2 individuals were common ancestors of ours. Is there any questions so far?
Danny, when you find that situation, or some of the people that are listening, when you find that situation, can you date these to a time?
We can. There is a manual method, but Family Tree has spent a lot of time and effort developing this thing called the haplogroup reports, or I'm sorry, the Discover Haplo reports.
Right.
That is it's free to anybody. I mean, you don't even have to be a member of Family Tree DNA. But once a branch is actually formed and named, it takes about a week, but they will actually date it for us. So in the past, I used to have to manually figure out the date on this.
Right.
But now that Family Tree does it, it is it's pretty good. It's pretty nice how they've done that. It makes my job as an administrator a lot easier. A great question.
Danny.
Yes.
I have one of my father's brothers, an uncle, has the Y67. It's administered actually by a cousin, one of my aunts. She and her brother were doing a lot of genealogy, and then when this DNA stuff popped up, they've got that. If I get with my cousin and get him to upgrade to the Y700, so he's my father's brother. We're that closely related. What
is his last name? Sinclair?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
James
good.
Artist Sinclair.
Good.
Yeah. What'll happen if we do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I go through this presentation, I will kind of show you what I'm doing right now is exactly what would happen, providing and I'm sorry, it's your cousin that has
Actually,
the white.
Well, the DNA is my father's brother.
Okay.
Yeah, my uncle.
and you've done the big Y, and I
apologize.
Yeah. So providing you have private variances, more than likely you two would form a new branch, which is kind of what we're doing here. So pretend that you're this person instead of this Danny person. This is you, and this third cousin is your uncle would be right here. Hopefully, whatever private variances you have, he would also have some of those and would share that. So what will happen is you'll create a new branch. Why that's important is every time a new branch is formed, Family Tree DNA has more information that will enable us to better date the haplogroups, the branches upstream. So yeah, so that helps really everybody, not just yourselves on that. But you'll see as I kind of go through this presentation, what you're asking is exactly what will happen. So just kind of picture yourself in the same situation.
So if we were to create a new branch, it's likely that the time to most recent common ancestor will get closer to us, right?
Correct.
Right,
they'll have more
in the 1600s.
Yeah, so it will adjust. It won't tell us who that ancestor is, of course. It takes more research to do that. Why DNA testing won't give us it's John Doe, it's not going to give us that name, but it will give us enough data to hopefully pinpoint who that person is. And as you'll see near the end of the presentation, I'm able to actually determine one of my ancestors created a SNP, and that's what we hope for down the road, that we'll be able to determine who that ancestor is in the 1600s for your case.
Hey, Alan.
Yes.
The person you want to test, did they test with us?
Yes.
Okay.
They're actually in the project.
Good. That'll save you some money on going to the big Y700.
Yeah. Yeah. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I had a question, just going back to the private variants. You share those two with this other cousin. Does that mean that those variants happen before your other four that are named?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. No, you're spot on, and hopefully some other screenshots and some slides coming up will show that. But no, you're perfect. So those other four that he doesn't share means it happened. Those mutations occurred after we split off from our common ancestor. Yeah, so great question.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? Great. So once Family Tree does, you'll hear this periodically, we have to wait for Family Tree DNA to do their manual review. Like once you get your results, we have to sit around, we have to wait for Family Tree to actually go in and actually look at the results and see if there's any private variances. And then once there are, then they'll actually name them. So these two private variances that I share with my cousin, Family Tree DNA actually named them. So when we say named, that's what they did. So instead of me saying, hey, I've got a SNP called 3413891 with my cousin, we actually call it FT38344. Same thing with the other SNP. So that's what they're, when we say naming, that's what we mean. So the new block tree, so now got a brand new block tree, and this is what it looks like. You see my cousin has joined me over here, and one of the SNPs, the private variance 341 became FT3844. Well, that's my new branch with my cousin. Remember, I had two, right? Second one was that FT39512. I would think it would be what we call an equivalent SNP. That was what I was expecting down here because I shared it with him. But I don't see it. And it took me a few minutes to figure out what's going on. Like why isn't that an equivalent SNP? Like when I say equivalent, if you look at this BY11212, there's another SNP below it. That's an equivalent. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. But I was missing that. I was like, well, what happened here? Well, they put it way up here with these other SNPs. And that kind of confused me as to why that is. And I'll talk about that in a second. But you also see that I went down from 6 private variances down to 2. So why do I have 2? Like, right? I had 6 before, now I have 2. We're going to do some simple math. My 2 got crossed out. So now between me and my cousin, we have 4 SNPs. My cousin has 0. I have 4. My cousin has 0. 4 plus 0 divided by 2 is 2. That is why I have 2, an average, because now it's the average between the 2 of us. So and I'll talk about this SNP up here in a second, but I want to put a side by side. So here's what my old block tree looked like on the left, right? I had 6. It was just me. I had 2. I had 6 private variances. Now I matched 2 of them. 1 moved up here. 1 became my branch. And now between my cousin and I, it's really all 4 of the SNPs are underneath me, but it shows an average of 2. So I'm going to pause there to see what questions you have, and I'll talk about this one up here in a second. Is there any questions so far? Just kind of wanted to show you what the before and after look like.
Hey, Danny, this is Don Sinclair.
Hi, Don.
Hi. Where do we find this information? Is it on FTDNY? Or
Yeah, so
FTDNA, right?
yeah, so if you've taken, I apologize, I don't remember everybody that's taken the big Y, but if you've taken the big Y, you'll have a block tree. It'll be on your home page. There'll be an actual section, and it'll say block tree, and just click on that, and that will take you to your block tree.
Very good.
So somebody I had actually posted this presentation on the administration Facebook administration page, and somebody had asked a question like, why did this SNP go up here? Family Tree DNA will name a SNP when you have 2 people that share that SNP. If you look back here, there was already 4 people that had taken the big Y. I was the 5th. why didn't this SNP already get named up here? Why did it take my cousin, who is the 6th person, to actually get family tree DNA to name it, put it up here, right? So again, it takes 2 people to actually name a SNP if those 2 people both share a private variance. So I had to kind of go back and look. And the simple answer is 2 of the 4 people had only taken the Big Y 500, the older test. The Big Y 700 actually tests about 50% more of the Y chromosome than the Big Y 500, the older test. This SNP up here, I believe, was outside of what the Big Y 500 actually tested. So 2 of the individuals would never test it for this area. The other 2 individuals, when family tree DNA looked at it, they did have that SNP, but they were very low quality and there was only a couple reads. So when family tree DNA scans the Y chromosome, it makes multiple passes at it. And 2 of the individuals, they only did a handful of passes and they're very low quality. Mine, I had about 12 passes and they're all confirmed. My cousin had about 20. So at that point, family tree DNA said, okay, we think now we're confident, we'll go ahead and name it and make it an equivalent SNP up here. Since then, the 2 individuals that had Big Y 500, they upgraded to Big Y 700, and sure enough, they are positive for this SNP up here. And so now, family tree was correct on that. So that's why, in case you're looking at it again, it should only take 2 people, but in this case, it took 6 before they actually made that decision.
And Danny, that one you've been talking about up on the upper right, is it above those others because it's at a later time point?
No, great question. It's actually alphabetical order and numbers. So yeah, it's disregard the name of the branch, but when you look at the order, the B's start before the F's,
Sure.
before the Y's, before the Z's, and then it's the number. It's strictly that.
Okay.
These are equivalent because we don't know the order that these formed. So we call them equivalent SNPs. And I'll show a little bit more on that in upcoming slides. But a great question. And how and why family tree DNA picks, like why did they pick that branch name and why didn't they use this name? No idea. I think, I don't know if they flip a coin. There's some reason for it, but right now I'm not sure what that is. So before I move on, is there any more questions? Great questions so far. So I've tested one cousin and got 2 SNPs named out of, but I still have 4 left. So my goal is to name all 6 of them. So I went ahead and talked to my brother, say, hey, you willing to test? And he said yes. So ordered the test in 2021, and in June 2021, the results came. He is my identical twin brother, so I was pretty confident he was going to match all 4 of my SNPs. It's kind of also wanted to see what it would be like to have 2 twins test and see if there was any uniqueness on there. So fortunately, we are brothers. And he did match all 4 of mine, and these are the new names for that. So again, 2 people, it takes 2 to actually have the same private variance, and then they get named. Now they're named. So here's the new block tree in June of 2021. So those 4, let's see if I got it. Yeah. So here are the 4 new branches, or the 4 new SNPs, family tree named. And again, I don't know why they did. I don't know why they didn't pick the first one, but they picked the second one as the branch name, and then the 3 equivalents. So my cousin now is over here, because remember initially I was over here with him. Still got the Sinclairs. You'll notice that there's a couple other branches off here to the right. Just remember there's other people that are actually testing at the same time. So the block tree is going to get modified. But right now I'm only focusing on this right now. So, and again, I was talking about equivalents. You know, we don't know the order of them. I don't know which ancestor created these. Was it my dad? Was it my grandfather? Was it my great grandfather? Was it myself? I don't know. I don't know which one or who created those. So what do I do? Well, got to find another tester. So before I do that, kind of want to put again a side-by-side comparison of the last block tree with the new block tree. So on the left here, again, me and my cousin, then I tested, remember I had 4 private variances, tested my brother, he was positive for all 4 of them. So these hash marks just means that there's no private variances. So if you ever see that when you go to your block tree, that's all it means. Or remember, because my cousin, he only had 2, he matched me. So he then had 0. And then I had 4, tested my brother. Now I have 0, my brother has 0. So that's why these have these little hash marks. Just a little background on why why you would see that. Before I move on, any questions? So now it's kind of gets into changing the slides a little bit. Hopefully most of you have seen my diagrams that I create. This is just a segment of the Sinclair of Glasgow page or diagram that I create for me and Steve and our group. But this is just looking at my specific Redmond line. So this is me down here, B10027, and then my brother's right next to me. The one cousin, my first cousin I tested is a descendant of Robert J. Redmond. And then I also managed to get a couple other cousins to test, and they were descendants of Joseph T. Redmond. But what you see is me, my father was Frank, my grandfather's Chester, great-grandfather Carter, then his dad was Thomas, and then Lewis was their father. I had 4 SNPs. Now, Thomas Redmond up here, he had 4 sons, but I managed to test 3 descendants of 3 of his sons. So I want to kind of just talk about this for a second. So Thomas Redmond had these 3 sons. I descend from Lewis. When I say that these are private variances, they had to have been created from Lewis on down to me, because our common ancestor was Thomas with my cousins here, right? If these were not private, that means Thomas would have had those, and he would have passed it down to Robert, and he would have passed it down to Joseph, who in turn would have passed it down to their descendants. But because they didn't, I know that these 4 SNPs had to have been created starting with Lewis on down to myself. That's why they were called private initially. It's because it branched off. They were private to me. I get a second person to test. Now we're named, but it has to be from here because these 3 cousins did not have these SNPs, these mutations. So it means they had to start from Lewis on down to myself. Does that make sense? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different generations. Of the 6 generations, there was 4 mutations. So the question is, which of the 6 generations formed those 4 SNPs? So I'll pause there. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions on that? Good. So the testing plan, I managed to find another cousin who was a descendant of a brother to my Thomas. He descends from Hezekiah. and managed to talk him into testing and funded the Big Y 700 for him. And my hope, you hear occasionally people say, hey, we want to break up the block of equivalence. What that means is I just want to take one of these and hopefully form a branch. That means it's now going to break that up. But I don't know, I'm taking a chance that Lewis formed one of these 4 mutations. If the cousin comes back and he doesn't match any of these 4, then I know that Lewis didn't have it. So I know that it starts from Thomas all the way down to myself. At best, I would think he would only match one of the SNPs, because that means Lewis would have had that in order to pass down to my cousin and down to me and my brother. So he tested in October this past year, and he was positive for one of the SNPs and negative for the other 3. So what does that mean? That means that in order for him, my cousin, to have that SNP, in order for me and my brother to have that SNP, Lewis Redmond had to have that SNP to pass it down to his sons, Hezekiah and Thomas, to push it down to the 3 of us. And I kind of go back, remember, we know that Thomas, Lewis's father, did not have that SNP, because if he did, he would have passed it down to Joseph and Robert. So we know for sure that Lewis is the person that generated that SNP. And again, my cousin here was negative for these 3, which I would assume because he doesn't descend from Thomas or any of my line. He descends from Hezekiah, which is the son of Lewis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's the new branch. And I've already kind of said this, but to me, this validates that Lewis formed, this SNP was formed in Lewis. Now, I do want to do additional testing. I want to kind of beat this to death and make sure that there is no mistake, which I don't think there is, but I would like to try to find another descendant of Lewis, one of his other sons, and try to test to confirm that. And so now I've got 3 SNPs left. The question is, of those 3 SNPs, who descends, who formed these other ones? The other problem, not problem, but the other thing now is my cousin now has 4 of his own private variances, which is interesting because there's only 4 generations. So that tells me there's probably a mutation per generation for him.
Question, it's probably a really stupid question, but can a SNP mutate again after it's mutated once?
Yeah, no, that is a great question, actually. So when we're looking at the STRs, like the Y111, the Y67, Y37, those are also mutations, and those can actually back mutate, and there's a mutation rate on those. Some of them are fast mutating, some are slow mutating. But when we're talking about the SNPs here, there has been documentation that they've actually mutated again, but it's very rare.
We had one of those. Sorry, Danny, go ahead.
Oh, I would say it's very rare. It does happen. I have not seen it, but once it has mutated at that one single spot on the Y chromosome, it pretty much is stable at that point. That's why the big Y testing is so valuable, is because it's a lot firm on the mutation. So once it's mutated, it doesn't back mutate. Go ahead, Steve.
We got lucky and got the DNA sample from Lord Thurso over in Caithness, and we were testing that, and the results, I think it was the 37 marker came in, whatever. There was one, it's one of the old ones that it was believed to be heavily, like very stable. And
Yeah.
it turned out he had a 24 there rather than a 23, like everyone else in Caithness.
Yeah.
And there was much hand wringing over that.
Yep.
But it turned out that was one of those that back mutated.
Yep. And we do have a couple of those in the Sinclair project where it has back mutated. I thought an individual was part of another line. And once he had taken the big Y, he's on a different branch. And so it proved that he had back, that his one STR marker had back mutated. And that's why it looked like he was closer with his other family, but the big Y showed that, no, that's not truly the case. They didn't share a common ancestor for a couple hundred years. Great question. So again, so a new project is, my cousin here, he's got 4 new private variances, kind of, follow the same steps that I had just gone, find another relative, test, try to name these, and then form branches and try to figure out who's the individuals, where did they form, which individual formed that. Because if I form new branches here, it's going to make this branch up here, that date change. Kind of goes to Alan, back to your point. If he forms new branches, or I form more branches here, FTDNA is, family tree DNA is going to have more information to make this branch date, it'll modify it, and then all the way up, those additional branches will get modified too. So again, before and after. Before, I didn't know who each one of these generations who had a mutation. Tested my cousin, and sure enough, found a new branch. Now I only have 3. Again, this previously, I haven't talked about this, but my cousins here, I managed to their uncle nephew relationship here, so I knew that they would also form a new branch, which was done during the same time I was working on this. So here is the block tree as of a couple months ago, and hasn't changed. My other 2 cousins here, the descendants of Joseph, are here. Here are me and my brother. My third cousin once removed, and then my third cousin twice removed is here. Again, he has actually 4 private variances, but you've got to look at everybody that's under this branch here to get that average. So again, kind of just repeat process, identify the ancestor. Luckily for me, I've got an uncle that's willing to test. So I'll be testing him here probably in the next month or so. So he's a brother to my dad. Hopefully I'll know if I'll for sure create a new branch, because either it'll be from Chet and their father, or the grandfather, or the great grandfather. So I'm really looking forward to that. So summary, taking the big Y establishes the branches. It helps name the private variances. Testing a male relative with a known connection is like an uncle or first cousin, second cousin. You'll know that you should be able to name some of those private variances, which will of course establish those branches. So I do a lot of target testing, but for known cousins, I also do a lot of testing of unknown cousins. If I see that they're an autosomal DNA match, I'll take that chance. But when possible, I verify with additional big Y testers. Even if you take a relative and you help that person take the big Y 700, even if they are negative or they don't have a match, that also provides valuable information. Right now, I've got Matt Redmond on this call. He is my co-administrator on the Redmond line. He descends from John Redmond, who was born in 1667 in I think England. And my family and my cousins all think we descend from John. We don't. Matt and I are, you know, we're related by about a couple thousand years. You know, we have a common ancestor. But that negative results shows that, hey, no, we don't descend from John. We descend from a Sinclair. So even when you test somebody that you think you have a connection and it comes out negative, it still provides you valuable information. Best thing to do is find those STR matches at the Y37, Y67, Y111. Even if you don't know the common ancestor, getting them to upgrade to the big Y700 may eventually help us overcome a lot of the brick walls. And just going through the process may provide some additional clues that we have overlooked. And just full disclosure, even though I always push the big Y700 and Steve does too, we get no financial kickbacks from Family Tree DNA. Somebody asked me that once, like, do you get a percentage? And it's like, nope, we're volunteers. We just know the value of the big Y700. And to me, what I always focus on is I think of this as being a legacy, right? Identifying and documenting an ancestor. There's going to be researchers, you know, for hundreds of years, and they're going to be looking at the data that we provide today. You know, researchers, we will also be looking at brick walls and testing to try to find that progenitor that's going to help potentially future researchers. And to me, it's a legacy. And we're all pioneers in this area today, and it's our contribution to genetic genealogy.
If that brings up a really interesting point too, that everyone on this call, there's a way that you can bequeath your DNA study. Yeah. And so that we can continue, and even long after Danny and I are gone, next managers can continue to use those samples and learn from that. And I'll be putting up a video on the new website very shortly about that.
Yeah, no, Steve, that's a great point. There is a way, as Steve just mentioned, in your profile that you can make your kit, the beneficiary of your kit, to the Sinclair project administrators. Yeah. Meaning that you know, eventually when we all move on, if we're the beneficiary of it, then we could use project funds to actually update or upgrade a kit that might help researchers. Because we have a lot of people in our study that have you know, unfortunately passed away, don't have an email address, it's no longer valid. Love to upgrade them, but there's no way for us to do that. And I'll probably eventually put a very short presentation on how to do that. That kind of concludes my presentation. Kind of want to open it up for questions. You know, any feedback would be great. Like if there was something that was still questioning, I might be able to improve on the slides. But there is no such thing as a dumb question, because if you have a question, I'm sure somebody else has that same question.
So Danny, I was interested in your trying to find cousins, etc. Is it more important to find closer cousins or more distant cousins?
You know, I've seen a lot of debate, both, you know, in both directions. Honestly, to me, it's anybody that's willing to test. You know, I think just finding a person to test, whether it be a close relative or a distant cousin, is really been the challenge. Getting somebody close establishes your local haplogroup, right? So if you get a brother, a father, an uncle, cousin, that will name most, if not all, of your private variances, which is good, because now those private variances are used in the dating of the branches. but getting a more distant cousin to test, especially if you know, like if it's a fourth cousin, fifth cousin, and you know that relationship, that branch will then, you might be able to determine that branch, who that person is. Like on the Caithness side, you know, there's the fourth Earl of Caithness. We have a lot of people that have taken big Ys, and that branch up there, I think we know who that, you know, that the date of that branch was him. So I don't know if that helps.
And Greg, I would say say both. Because just like the Herdmanston group, and my passion is to figure out the groups that came over with the Conqueror, groups that came over with the Conqueror. And I'm pretty well convinced myself that I know who that is for your group, Greg. But I'll keep that a secret for now. But the other thing is making sure that, and it's opened my eyes how Danny does this, because it makes it very clear that you can, that he doesn't know how we connect, and I don't know how he and I connect. Right. So I realized that, and I got into the online site for the Bull Run Library, which is not far from a big shopping mall south of Route 66. It's very close to the land of Alexander Sinclair. And I found, just by within half an hour's research online, I found a burial site for the Redmond family. And I'm gonna have to go down there and get photos of it. But that's why I say both.
Yeah, my problem was that in my father's line, he was one of 7, the only boy. So don't have any other Ys to do. We did my dad, my brother, my son, myself. So I think we got that side kind of squared off. Yeah. But I know there was another guy who's a James St. Clair. He actually born in California, but he lives in Pennsylvania now, that he's much further away from me. You know, he split off 5 generations ago. But I thought it might be interesting to try and get him to do that, because he's just on Ancestry. But it would be kind of interesting, I thought.
He could transfer his Ancestry results into FTDNA and get it, and they do that for free, I believe.
I'm going to contact him and see what we can do. Worst case, if he would agree, we would just fund him and get him to do it.
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull up the diagram. Are you guys able to see the diagram up? Yeah. Yeah. So this kind of just shows you over the last couple years how much that Steve and I have learned about our relationship. You know, up the very top is that branch, the ZS 4576 that I was initially in. And since, you know, there was initially just the 4 of them under this RZ 4578, and then I came along, and then I started testing my cousins, and then we found some other individuals. And you can see we've got additional branches that's formed, but each time there was a big Y, it gives us more data, and these using that Discover Haplogroup report, it gives us the dates. So Steve and I know that my Redmond line and his Alexander Sinclair line, we share a common ancestor around 1600. And when we know that his Alexander Sinclair was born about 1666, I'm thinking his grandfather is probably our common ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
But there was, you know, when we first tested, Steve and I didn't know if his Sinclair line was Redmond's, and I didn't know if my Redmond lines were Sinclair's. But as we test, we created new branches that's formed above our 2 branches. Well, we know that the individuals that descend from this Y32809, they were all Sinclair's. And the branch up here, we had one person that descends from Williams Sinclair. So all these branches, 3 branches above me, are all Sinclairs. That's why I know that I descend from Sinclairs and Steve doesn't descend from Redmonds.
That one on the right is the guy that just showed up, right, Danny?
Yeah, yeah,
That was a big day because it
Yeah,
pushed all of the Glasgow people back to the early 1400s rather
Yep.
than 1666. We don't know who that person is. We roughly know. We know that he was, I think we could be comfortable saying he's in Scotland.
Yeah.
But that's my next goal, is to figure out who he is just by going back to the records.
Yeah, and what's really nice is, you know, it gives us a good timeline that we know that the Sinclair line goes back to at least the 1400s.
And because of the Lyle connection, Lyle affinity, I call it, the Herdmanstons know they go back to the 1200s now, Danny, is that right?
Yeah,
It's fun to have at parties to brag about that kind of stuff.
I was curious,
So,
what kind of strategies do you use to get, especially people that you don't know well, to get them to test? I mean, do
Yeah.
you end up paying for them to test? Because I mean, that's a lot to ask for somebody to pay that much money to do a
Yeah,
big
no,
project.
great question. It is challenging because everyone's heard of Ancestry, everyone's heard of 23andMe, and they know this autosomal DNA testing, but they've never heard of Y-DNA testing. I just talked to a cousin last week about getting her brother to test, and she never even heard of Y-DNA testing, never heard of family tree DNA. But there's so much, it's so powerful, more than autosomal DNA testing. So I had to kind of educate them. Some of them are pretty good. Instead of just jumping straight to the big Y700, a lot of times we just do the Y37 test. And when we do it during a sale, it's, you know, what, 119. It's a little bit more manageable. And then depending on what the results are, then we potentially would have that conversation saying, hey, we upgrade. Are you willing to do it? Hey, sometimes we've heard, you know, I can't really afford all that. Well, what if I chip in $100 to help offset that cost? And depending on who that individual is and what group it is, Steve and I may use project funds to help offset some of that cost too. You know, the project funds are for the project. Steve and I can't use it for anything other than Y-DNA testing. That's all we can use it for. So sometimes if we have a very key individual target test that might give us some data, that is another option. But the way I approach it is I just talk with them, explain things, and then if funding is an issue, depending on how critical it is, we'll either I'll chip in my own money or use project funds.
Leslie, you've just given me an idea. I mean, I'm in marketing and I compel people to buy things, you know, products. I have not unleashed that on this DNA study other than once. And that was over in the UK because our participation in the UK is abysmal. I think they're afraid that it will go, you know, their DNA will go to the CIA or something like that.
Yeah.
I've heard people say that to me. It's crazy, but the easiest thing we could also do is if you know someone, you can get me or Danny or both on one of these video calls, and we can have Danny and I'll work up a script that we'll use.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't like to leap to the money because, not because I don't have it. I don't, but you know, I have enough. But my point is, I don't like to leap to the money because every time I've done that, or like when companies that I work with in marketing, they go to a sale, they're losing money and they're training people that, you know, this is not worth that much. But this, I mean, think of our great everyone on this call, everyone's great grandchildren are going to use this. They're going to see this.
Yeah.
And hopefully help us by joining the project. And getting some distant cousins to do the same.
Two things I've found: information and inspiration. If you can inspire that person to understand what it means to you, what it means to the project,
Well
that's
said.
very
Yeah.
important. Inspiration and information. That's from Diane Southard, if you all are familiar with her. But
Yep.
that's what she encourages. And right now, I'm in the process of somebody turning me down because they've not responded, but I've never had anybody ever turn me down for why mitochondrial or autosomal that I've asked. I've
That's
sent 3 letters to brothers and I've not heard from them for 2 weeks. So I don't think I'm going to. So I've just got to go back to my chart, because I create a chart of descendants in an Excel spreadsheet. And I start with, okay, what am I trying to find out? What ancestor am I trying to prove or understand more? And this is a specific why, project, big why. But I put a chart of all the descendants. And when I get to the bottom, if they don't have the right male or female, I put an X mark. And then I go to the next column. Who did they descend from? Are they the right target tester? And I've written letters. The letters are like 2.5 pages long. I'd say, this is your line. This is the reason that you're a good tester. This is what you're going to help me. I really need your help. I'm working on this project. I need to prove an ancestor. I need to prove whatever the specifics are. But I really need your help. And only so many people can be that target tester. And you are, because of this. And that I'll share all my research with you. I've researched your line. I'll share it all with you. And but I don't give that information until the test is returned to the company.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a good idea to do like start out with the Y37.
Yeah.
And just kind of see where you stand with them.
Yeah. It's a little bit easier. I mean, that's what I love about family tree DNA, that you can give one sample
Yes,
and then
upgrade it.
upgrade later. Just provide the money and the upgrade. Matt and I were fortunate. He found a Y37 that just showed up one day on his match list, and he's from England. And Matt and I were like, "Yeah, we're upgrading this person. We'll pay for it out of our own pocket because it will help establish a timeline for that John Redmond." So it was one individual. We're like, we'll jump right to it. We'll pay for it if we have to, because it was a critical match for us. But it was always, I mean, every day I hope that we get all of a sudden a surprise Y37 or Y111 that pops up that we weren't expecting.
Yep.
Yeah, those are exciting. Great question, Leslie.
Leslie, the other thing is, and Sherry, go look at the new website, stclairresearch.org. It's still a work in progress, but there are things on there that you can use. There's videos you can point them at. Because I have to tell you, I look at other DNA sites out there and they're very, very sleepy, and we're all over this. And I don't have any other hobbies. This is it.
I'd like to thank you all for inviting me or allowing me to glom onto your conversation. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Matt. Glad you were able to attend.
Good luck with your research, everyone. And thanks I'm a little awkward on Zoom calls because this is my first one. So
Did a
thanks
great
for
job.
bearing with me.
Great job.
Thanks.
Well,
Great.
that's-
You did a great job with your presentation,
Oh, thank you.
by the way. Yeah.
And anybody has
I think
any? Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to, give you the praise that you deserve, because I know it was a lot of work, and it really is crystallizes the information, and it's, makes it very easy to understand, especially when you go back and compare the comparison charts and all. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And if anybody wants this presentation, just send me an email and I'll push it to you so you have it. And then Steve will be posting this on the Sinclair site. And yeah, and I think that's pretty much all we have, unless there's any other questions.
No, Donnie, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Matt said, and thank you very much for this. And the fact I had no questions meant you were so clear. So thanks a
Oh,
lot.
good. Yeah, I appreciate it because I've done this a couple times and there's like no questions. I don't know if I've just confused everybody or if it was more
Yeah.
clear. So thank you for
No, it was very
mentioning
clear.
that. Yeah,
Very
thank you.
clear.
Great,
Thanks.
great. Well, I hope everybody. Oh, thank you, Matt.
I'm gonna get off, but thanks again. Good to see you.
Good seeing
Have
you, Matt.
fun out there.
Have a good weekend.
Okay.
So Steve, that's all I had. I don't know if you had anything else.
No, but just keep checking in and, you know, other questions will pop up for you guys and we're happy to help.
Yep. Just
Yep.
if anything else comes up, just send me an email.
You bet. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.